now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests. He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called how can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time that I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying,
my message to those guys that first thing this morning is go get a cup of coffee, maybe you'll learn something.
We don't to defend the Constitution against all unreasonable foreign and domestic. I don't think we're an expiration date on that. He is the free American, Colin Douglas. That's the Free American, weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. If I want to tear the moon down from the sky and rock the sun, for the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I am your host. I am Clay Douglas, and my guest today is Judy Byington. Dave, you need to mute your mic there, please. We got, I got other sound coming in here, Dave. All right. See what I can find on Sandy and Dave, we need to mute your mic there if you're talking to somebody else. Thank you very much. My guest today is Judy Byington. She's the author of 22... What's that?
Douglas, Colin. I'm supposed to call him.
No, Judy, you are right there. We've got you right now. I'm talking to you.
Spirit's on right here. I think Douglas is on here.
Okay, Judy, I've got you up and I can hear you. Can you hear me? Judy, can you hear me?
Apparently she has her speakers or her earphones muted.
Okay, well, call her back on the telephone. Maybe she knows how to use a telephone here. Judy, you cannot hear me here. Okay, we'll try to bring Judy back up. Let me give you an introduction. She is the...
Hello?
Yes, Judy, can you hear me now?
Are you online, Doug?
Yes, ma'am. I'm online. I'm on Skype. We've got you up on Skype, and you just haven't been able to hear me, I guess, or we've heard conversation from you. We can hear you. I'm not sure what the problem is. Do we? Can you hear me now, or do we need to call you back on the phone? What's going on, Dave? What are you, I don't...
Whether her mic's on, her speaker's on.
Hello?
Hello, Judy.
Judy,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dave.
This is Dave Corso from Little Spirit Radio. We have you up on Skype. Apparently you can't hear us.
No, we can't hear you.
Well, just hang up Skype and we'll talk on the phone then.
Okay.
All right. I think she just hung up on her phone there.
No, I just hung her up on Skype. She's here on the phone.
Okay, Judy, are you there now? Can you hear me now?
I'm here on the phone, and I can hear you. Yes, hi.
Hi, how are you, dear? I'm sorry for
I'm
the
great.
sorry for the technical difficulties there. Sometimes it gets confusing when you got more than one number. Now, you are the author of 22 Faces. This is a story about the extraordinary life of Jenny Hill and her 22 multiple personalities. I've got it up here that she was saved by an angel from certain death, and that she utilizes prayer, forgiveness, and her multiple personalities to triumph over a Nazi mind controller attempting to mold her into a Manchurian Candidate. Now, it also says here on my page, where I've got the information about this show, that your book documents how the only known survivor of who was an intended victim of a modern-day human sacrifice ceremony, that 6-year-old Jenny Hill, she was being sacrificed. Let's start right there and tell us why who was behind this. I'm assuming that at 6 years old, her parents had to be done in this. Was this a CIA operation, a satanic operation? Why was she being sacrificed, and how was she saved from that closed ceremony? Could we start right there?
She was part of a family that had, excuse me, this isn't working because I've got a echo in here. Could we try to get it on Skype?
Yes, ma'am. If you got your speakers on or headphone in so you can hear me, we can call you back on Skype.
Okay, thank you.
Can you do that, Dave?
Judy, can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
All right. All right, Judy.
Okay, and next question. Jenny was part of her mastermind controller was a CIA. According to the 1995 congressional hearings, there were some witnesses there who talked about a Dr. Greenbaum, who is head of the CIA mind control program. And Jenny was being mind controlled by him. How he was connected to her sacrifice ceremony, we're not really sure, except that he was just there. As a 5-year-old, she had been she alleges that she's been abused by her father since she was 4 years old. And the purpose of her going to this sacrifice ceremony was to sacrifice her. She was prepared for 3 months prior to the ceremony to be quiet during her own sacrifice through a series of torture techniques that this Dr. Greenbaum used. So in answer to your question, it was connected to the CIA. Why it was connected to the CIA, we're not sure, other than the father appeared to be involved, and it was done through a satanic ceremony there in Garden Grove, California.
Now, this Dr. Green, is it possible he had another identity from Germany, like possibly Dr. Mengele?
There are several survivors that have talked about being programmed by a Dr. Green, and he seems to be described in two separate ways. There's also other survivors who have said that they were programmed by a Dr. White and by other colors, you know, they were referred to. They all appear to be Nazi people brought over by the CIA back in 1953. This Dr. Green is described by Corydon Hammond in a study he did. Corydon Hammond is a psychologist who did a study on ISSTD clients. The International Society for Study of Trauma and Disassociation was organized back in 1983 because there were so many ritual abuse survivors coming out of the woodwork and saying, you know, that they were being mind controlled and ritually abused. And there were so many back in the 1980s that they formed this International Society for the Study of Trauma and Disassociation to form treatment models for them. At that first meeting in Chicago in 1984, Corydon Hammond was there, and he got together with 18 other therapists and did an 8-year study on their clients. And he released that study at a psychiatric conference in the early 1990s. What he said in there was that 75% of those clients had been programmed by a Dr. Green. And he described him in the same way that Jenny Hill described him to me, that he was short with balding brown hair, walked with a limp in his left leg and carried a cane and had a German accent. Now, there are other ritual abuse survivors who have described their master programmer as Dr. Green, but they describe him in a way that he looks like Mengele. So we know that there were several Nazi programmers, but this particular one we know as Dr. Green, who was brought in by the CIA during Project Paperclip.
There was the head of the SS was also brought in, promoted to general. So we've are we talking about a government-sanctioned operation here? Or are we talking about a satanic cult? Or maybe that begs to answer, is the CIA a satanic cult? There's certainly...
We're talking about both. Back in 1947, of course, they established the CIA. In 1950, they started doing some mind control. I'm talking about according to survivor testimonies. And then in 1953, they brought in, under Project Paperclip, a group of Nazi mind control experts into the U.S., Dr. Green being one of them. And then in 1964, they supposedly closed the program because of protests. But then we have hearings in 1977 on the program, and at that time, Helms, just prior to those hearings, Helms was the CIA director, and Helms is later named in the 1995 congressional hearings as being a perpetrator. But Helms destroyed the MKO documents by that time. There were several programs that the CIA started in mind control, and MK Ultra seems to be one of the larger ones. And he destroyed those documents prior to a congressional hearing in 1977 and prior to his resignation. So what I'm saying is that at that time, we know connections to the satanic cults because they were using them as to do their programming on these little children. So, and that all goes back to Hitler and his, from these Nazi experts. Hitler was student Lester Crowley, England, who calls himself the father of Satanism, and he would train his troops and use people from the concentration camps to do his mind control experiments. And that was the information that these Nazi experts brought over with them when they worked with the CIA. So we know from the very beginning they were using satanic cults to do some of their programming. They also used universities and hospitals. There's quite a large group of them they used. There were 80 participating Canadian and U.S. institutions in their program, 44 colleges and universities. So they were using colleges, universities, and institutions, both in Canada and the U.S., to do their program, as well as satanic cults.
You're talking about the psychiatric hospitals, mental institutions here. They could serve a dual purpose. They were taking out dissidents, calling them crazy. If you believe in conspiracy theories, you might be crazy, and so they've used these mental institutions, both here and the Soviet Union. It wasn't just Germany.
And residential schools. There's different studies that's been done on children in different residential schools, both in Canada and in the U.S. and in Australia, where they've actually used children as guinea pigs in these mind control experiments. One of the interesting books that's out is by Kevin Annett. It's called Hidden No Longer, and you can find that on our website. Read it for free, childabusrecovery.com. Hidden No Longer by Kevin Annett. It discusses the use of residential schools up in Canada for Native American children and how they were used in experiments in some of the provincial hospitals up there. Canada and had an agreement with the Catholic Church and other churches up there to eliminate the Indian tribes, and they would make these children go to these residential schools as young as 6 years old, and they would abuse them in the residential schools and give them smallpox and all kinds of things to try to eliminate the tribes. But in that book, it talks about some of them being used in the provincial hospitals in Canada for these CIA mind control experiments.
Now, you know, just you mentioned Mengele. I've seen photographs of Mengele sitting around with the sheriff family, who later, I assume here, changed their name to Bush. There was Prescott Bush and George Bush Sr. As the children, they were called they were going by the name of Sheriff, and Mengele was taken, had a photograph taken with that family. Now, George Bush is mentioned pretty prominently in Kathy O'Brien's book, again about mind control, about the whole MK Ultra project. Do you have any information on that? Are you aware of that?
I don't have any personal information on that. I've talked to Kathy and I've read her book and I'm aware of that information, but I don't have personal information. The only information I have, of course, is from Jenny and other survivors that I've talked with, and Jenny's only connection is with this Dr. Greenbaum.
Now, let's go back to Jenny, who how was she saved from this sacrifice? There's I believe you said in your book that she was probably the only one.
This particular satanic sacrifice ceremony was in Garden Grove, California. It was held on June 21st, 1965, summer solstice. It was definitely a satanic ceremony that they'd prepared her for 3 months. But there were two little girls, two little 6-year-old girls. One was Jenny, and the other one, Jenny later identified as Kathleen Shea, who was a little girl who went missing from Tyrone, Pennsylvania, 3 months prior to the satanic ceremony, which is kind of interesting because that at the time she went missing, at the time Kathleen Shea went missing, was the same time that they began mind controlling Jenny in Garden Grove, California. So they had two little 6-year-old girls, and the other little girl was murdered. Jenny had to watch that murder, and there's a video of part of her testimony about that ceremony on Child Abuse Recovery and on 22faces.com that people can watch. It's also a YouTube video. But how Jenny was saved by a heavenly intervention, and you have to read the book to really understand what went on. But cut the ceremony, and then she was taken back home at that point. And at that point, she didn't have any more ritual abuse done on her. However, she was continued. She alleges that her father still continued to rape her until she was a preteen.
Did the father or mother ever get taken to trial or arrested or prosecuted for this type of abuse? Or are they protected?
No,
are they protected by somebody?
And their story is very common to ritual abuse survivors in that these memories are kept in their subconscious, these traumatic memories, and for 20, 30, 40 years until they're adults and able to come forth. To understand this, you have to understand what dissociation is. Dissociative identity disorder is the same thing as multiple personality disorder. Jenny had 22 different multiple personalities, and the reason she had those multiple personalities was because of trauma during childhood. This is what the CIA mind control is based on, is fracturing the personality into different personalities in order to control the person throughout their lives. And this is what happened to Jenny. Think of your mind as a tree, and the trunk of that tree is your core personality. And if you're a child and you're going through trauma, that memory of that traumatic experience will be held in a branch of that tree, and it's not connected to the core personality. It's a repressed memory, and it's held by an alter personality until the mind is in a safe place where that memory can come forward. It's the same thing as post-traumatic stress and daydreaming, actually. Disassociation happens to everybody. On a continuing, daydreaming is on one end of the spectrum. Post-traumatic stress, which happens to adults when they go through trauma, is in the middle of the continuum. And on the far end is multiple personalities, where and multiple personality, as far as I know, only happens to a child. And it has something to do with the developing brain of a child as they're going through stress. So those memories of that abuse situation is held there for many, many years. And if you go into 22faces.com, you can read the first chapter of Jenny's life, where she is a 6-year-old and she is dissociated. She knows she's going through trauma, but she doesn't remember the trauma. It's a safeguard for the mind in order to help the mind cope with what's going on. So these memories are held for 20, 30 years, and then when they finally come forth, we're dealing with the memory of a child, something that happened 20, 30 years ago. There's no evidence for the crime. The perpetrators, have probably are still in control of the victim through this mind control. So they're very, very difficult cases to prosecute. I did send referrals to Tyrone, Pennsylvania. I talked to the cold case detective in Tyrone, Pennsylvania about the case. He reopened the case and looked into it. We did send information down to Garden Grove, California. The perpetrators, some of Jenny's perpetrators, are still active and in Garden Grove, the last I heard. But as far as I know, there's been nothing done on the cases, even though we can identify the victim and we have a witness to the crime. That's another problem we have, is that the courts are very reluctant to take this into court because you're dealing with victim witnesses who are multiple personalities, and sometimes they won't allow them to testify in court. That's happened to me on a case I've been working with the Utah AG office for many years, where they actually had the perpetrator on trial, but they wouldn't take the witnesses to his crimes. They wouldn't even talk about taking those witnesses into court because they were multiple personalities. They're very difficult cases to prosecute.
These personalities, they're formed from abuse. How do they make use of them? I mean, in Jenny's case, she had a personality called JJ that was foul-mouthed and cussing, and Jenny couldn't even understand, you know, why her mouth was saying these kinds of words.
Yes, and so the original question was, I'm sorry, what was the original question?
How are these personalities being used? Are they being used by the CIA? Are they programming these other personalities to do things like you mentioned, the Manchurian Candidate? And Kathy O'Brien, she was used to deliver drugs to George Bush, Manuel Noriega, and others, high-level personalities. She was also sent in to manipulate or control politicians, governors, senators, things like that, using her sexually.
How they do that is that if they know that a person has been programmed, they call it the green method, in this green method, then they can talk about certain words, and those words will bring forth the alter personalities. For instance, JJ, well, first of all, I need to explain how Jenny's alter personality tree line is formed in order for you to understand this.
Go ahead.
Jenny was she claims that she was sexually abused by her father from age 4 through about preteen years. And that sexual abuse formed, the first alter personality that came forth was this JJ, and she's head of an alter family. JJ has about 6 or 7, no, she has 9 alter personalities underneath her that are formed. Some of them are formed from the core personality, but some of them come out of JJ, because JJ, when she would be in a sexual abuse experience, see, these alters hold these abuse experiences, and when Jenny was being abused, there were certain parts of sex that she didn't like, and so these other alters she would form another alter to hold the experience of the part of the abuse that she didn't like. So she has the whole alter family underneath her. And then she was also sexually abused in the ritual stuff. So some of these alters hold memories of the ritual abuse stuff too. But then there's another alter family that's headed by head alter Angelique. And this is the alter family that was mind control programmed when Jenny was, well, just before she turned 6 years old. She started to become mind control programmed, and this head alter Angelique was the first one to form during that torture. And then there are other specific alters that came out. Some of them were formed during the satanic ceremony, because they torture these children in these ceremonies, and depending on the torture, then the alter would be formed. Then there's a third alter family called head alter Vanessa, and this is one person family, and she was formed when Jenny got into a situation where JJ took over her body and she got her into a situation where she was gang raped. And this formed an alter Vanessa. So when these altars were formed, some of them called themselves their, names. But when this Dr. Green started to program Jenny, then he would do specific, like he would sexually abuse Jenny, and that would, of course, bring forth Alter JJ. But then when Alter JJ came forth, then he gave her another name, which was Beta. And Beta is the sexual abuse alter in this Green Mind Control programming. So somebody who knows how this programming works, and they want to call forth this sexual abuse, alter, they would call out the name Beta, and Beta would, take over the body, and in that way that perpetrator could control the person and do whatever they wanted at that point. That's how this stuff works, is that they program these different alters, once they're formed, they program them with certain information, and then they call forth that alter to give forth that information at a later date. That's how they control the individual. Jenny herself is not being accessed, as far as I know, by, this mind control stuff. That pretty much ended right after she was saved from the ceremony, but others obviously are.
Now, how did, maybe you could tell me a little bit about your background and how you and Jenny, how you met Jenny. How did you guys get together?
It goes back to the early 1980s. Back in 1980 or so, there was a lawsuit that was brought against the CIA and the U.S. government and the Canadian government, and this Dr. Cameron, who was head of the American Psychiatric Association, that was running the CIA program. And there was a lawsuit that was brought against them by some survivors, and the lawsuit was won. And so that started the big stir in the community. And then another thing that happened in 1980 was that a book came out by the name of Michelle Remembers. And Michelle Remembers is the story of a little girl who was given by her mother to a satanic coven. And as happens with multiple personalities, she developed multiple personalities because of the abuse. And then later on, 40 years later, she started having memories of this abuse, and she went to Lawrence Pastor, who's a psychiatrist, and they eventually ended up writing her biography, Michelle Remembers. Well, that became a bestseller in 1980. And as a result of those two instances, there were a lot of ritual abuse survivors that started going to therapists asking for treatment for multiplicity because they had been ritually abused. So during this time, a lot of people were also going to LDS Social Services. LDS Social Services is a counseling arm of the LDS Church. And the president of the church at the time, Ezra Taft Benson, who used to be Secretary of Agriculture under Dwight D. Eisenhower, he was president of the LDS Church. At the same time that all these people were coming to LDS Social Services saying they've been ritually abused, he's from Idaho, and there was a little baby found at that time in Idaho that had been found. It was found in a trash can, and all the organs were missing, and it was obviously a ritually abused child that had been killed in a satanic ceremony. They didn't ever find the perpetrators, but Idaho passed the first ritual abuse law, and it's called the Baby X Law. Well, President Benson is from Idaho, and this happened close to his hometown, so he became very concerned about what was going on. So he formed a committee. It's a 12-person committee, and he headed up by Elder Glenn Pace. Glenn Pace was a presiding authority in the LDS Church in the bishopric. They studied these different referrals that were coming into LDS Social Services, and President Hinckley, when he was president of the church, he granted me an exclusive interview with Elder Pace on this, what's called as the 1990 LDS Ritual Abuse Report. You can find it on the internet. But Elder Pace told me that they interviewed over 100 people. He told me that they could have interviewed three times that many, if need be. But he says we just didn't have the time. But part of his report said that 45 members had witnessed human sacrifice. So this was going on. So the LDS Church hired a genealogist, and this always goes on in multi-generational satanic families. That is, they will abuse their own children. And so they traced the perpetrators through this genealogy, and then they turned it over to a lot of the people were from Utah. So they turned the information over to the Utah Attorney General. At the very same time, the Utah Attorney General had its own committee. They were going out and interviewing therapists and investigators in the state that had to do with ritual abuse, and they found some of the same information as in the LDS report. So they hired satanic ritual abuse investigators. That's where I came into the picture. The first arrest of the Utah Attorney General's ritual abuse investigators was a satanic coven leader whose daughter and niece came to me and asked for my help. I had been head of family counseling center down in Provo, but I had to take out early retirement because I had a very ill daughter who eventually passed away. But at that time, they knew that I was free and they needed some help. This man had been arrested. They only charged him with a couple of counts of abuse on one of the daughters. But this oldest daughter, and she was 24 years old, and her cousin was 24 years old. They were both married. And but after their arrest, they began having these repressed memories come back of abuse in childhood, and they remembered their fathers being there and raping them, and they'd see a child murdered about once a year during their childhoods. And they hadn't seen each other since childhood, but they had a chance meeting at a local mall here one day, and they realized that they were having the very same memories come back, and they couldn't get to the ritual abuse investigators because they were multiple personalities, and so they didn't want to use any of their information. So they came to me and said, will you help us? We want to get this information. We'll try to get this man tried on what he's done. So I spent over a year with them, and we went out to different coven sites and where they had allegedly seen these murders and been raped and had all this satanic activity during their childhoods, which also began with them around the age of 4, just as it did with Jenny. Then we gathered all this information, and I took it up to the Utah Special Investigators, and I took it up to Reed Richards, who's the Lieutenant Attorney General at the time. Anyway, the short story is that they didn't use the information because these women were multiple, and they didn't want to use them in court, and the man got off on a quirk of the law, and he's still free. So I was taking this information to an FBI agent. The same day that I approached the FBI agent, Jenny Hill approached him. Now, she had seen this other little girl murdered when she was 6 years old, and she was trying to find the parents of this little girl. So the FBI agent didn't open a case for either one of us, but he did put us together, and that's how I met her, and she eventually asked me to write her biography.
Now, somebody in the chat room brought up something that may or may not be relevant. He said the child's mind shuts down when this abuse occurs, allowing a demon to take control and continue with the assigned task. I mean, you've mentioned that this is satanic. Is it possible that this is a method to allow possession?
Well, the satanic ceremony is designed around getting demons, to come in and possess both the bodies of the perpetrators and the victims. But all I know is what Jenny tells me about what it's like. She's had both demon possession, and of course she has these 22 multiple personalities. And she says the feeling is very, very different. You know, the multiple personalities are formed because of the abuse, and they're formed as a protection for the person, for the brain, in order to cope with all this trauma that's going on. And they come out to protect, and this is very interesting in the book, as Jenny grows up, you know, they'll come out and try to protect her in different situations. Now, demon possession, Jenny says, is very different, and she had 3 or 4 demon possessions while she was at the Utah State Psychiatric Hospital. What happened with Jenny is that she grew up with these multiple personalities, and she's very, very bright, and she went to school and got a nursing degree, and she was applying at the Utah State Psychiatric Hospital to be a nurse, and she changed personalities, and she ended up staying in the psychiatric hospital for a year or so in treatment. During this time that she was at the hospital, they defined 17 of her alter personalities in her treatment. Also at the state hospital, she had these demon possessions, and they were reported by the psychiatry, you know, by the medical community there, so we know that they happened. And she says, multiple personality is something within me. She says it's part of my personality and it's part of me. Where a demon possession, you can actually feel the energy and the force come into you. And she said, generally it came in through my nose, through the, you know, or different orifices of the body, but generally through her nose. And it would actually be a demon where, you know, she would twitch from every cell and do all kinds of weird things, act like a bird in one instances, and every muscle in her body was twitching in another instance. And this is actually recorded on the state hospital records. And at those times, they called in the LDS elders and asked to give her a blessing, and it released the demon from the body, and you know, she left and became normal again. But she says it's a very different feeling than having multiple personalities. It's a completely separate type of force.
How is she today? Now, she's, what, in her 30s now?
She's in her 50s.
50s? Was she able to recover sufficiently to have a normal life? Did she get married? Did she have a husband? Well, what is her condition today?
Well, her story is in the book. She has a couple of marriages in the book, and she has 3 sons. She is doing very well since the book came out. Her entire life, what she wanted to do was be able to expose her story, and she always wanted this book written. So we spent 20 years on the book together, going through and doing it. And she was very, very excited when we finally got it published and released. She doesn't speak in public. She doesn't want to come out. She's asked me that I speak for her. She's doing fine. She's still in mental health treatment. She hasn't received really good mental health treatment, to tell you the truth. We've had a couple of instances that have been very scary. What happened is she was diagnosed at the Utah State Psychiatric Hospital as having dissociative identity disorder, or multiple personality disorder as it was known back then. Then, when she got out of the hospital, she continued with Tiffin-Otis Mental Health, what's now called Wasatch Mental Health. But the problem came that they had a psychiatrist that came in that changed her diagnosis from DID to psychotic. And they started giving her these medicines that weren't appropriate. She ended up in the emergency ward one time, and she called me from the emergency ward, and she says, they're saying I have to take these medications, and they're killing me, and I'm really scared. Would you come and get me? So I went down there, and I picked her up, and I took her up to the University of Utah inpatient psychiatric. And they kept her up there for over about 6 weeks or so and got her off all these medications and then released her, and she went back to Wasatch Mental Health. Then about a year later, they changed psychiatrists, and he did the same thing. And this time, we didn't catch it, and she did suffer some brain damage because of it. After the book came out, they finally started to say, we need to reduce her medications. And so with all the publicity from the book, I guess that they decided that they possibly were doing something that wasn't correct, so they have started to reduce her medications. This last year, she has been under quite a bit of medications, and now I understand she's, getting off of those, so I think she is doing a lot better. But as far as actually being cured of multiplicity, I probably know over 100 people with multiplicity because they approach me because of the book and because they know I've been working with this. And I do not know one person with multiple personality disorder who has, quote, fully integrated all those personalities. And my own concept of that is that since it only happens to children because of their developing brain, I think it must be some physical thing that happens within the body that would prevent them from fully integrating. However, that being said, I do know of some people with multiple personalities that are completely normal appearing and, function extremely, extremely high. I have a very good friend who has 50 multiple personalities, and she lectures, she gives seminars to therapists on how to treat multiplicity. She's written a book, and she's in the process of writing another book, and functions very, very highly. Her neighbors don't even know that she's multiple because she functions so highly, and it's because she's been able to be in control of all these alters that she possesses, and she does it a lot through meditation, where she'll actually talk to the alters and say, this is what we're going to do today, and gets everybody to agree on what we're going to do. So it's a very long process. It's taken her 20 years or so to get there, but there is healing possible with multiplicity. But as far as fully integration, I personally don't think it's possible, but there may be some out there who have.
Well, she sounds like she's recovered pretty well. What about others that haven't recovered? How are they being used by our government or by these satanic cults? And that could be anybody from George Bush on down, isn't it?
I can only tell you my own experiences, and we recently put out a petition. It's a petition for a congressional investigation of the CIA mind control program, and you can go into our website, childabuserecovery.com, and click on that petition, and I hope your listeners do that, because we really need to have a lot of people sign this petition. We've got senators that are looking at it, and if we want to get a lot of enthusiasm about it so we can get an investigation going of the CIA program. But in that petition, you can also read comments from survivors. They're very, very interesting to look at. And there are several of comments in there that say, I am presently being accessed, and my child is in the program. I went to a conference, the SMART conference I spoke at last September in Connecticut. SMART is a group, a very large group of mind control survivors. It's run by Neil Brick, does a very good job. And at that conference, there were survivors there that said they had children that were taken into the program, taken at birth. They were impregnated. They took the babies away from them at birth, and they are in the program. And this is something that's just absolutely atrocious to me, and this is one of the reasons why we started this petition, is we have got to get an investigation going on this. There are children out there being used, being tortured, being in the CIA mind control program, and we're paying for it as U.S. taxpayers. It's just undescribable, and it just infuriates me, the whole thing.
Again, what is the ultimate goal of this? I mean, what are they are doing this for a reason. They have a plan. Is this like the Masonic great work that they're just using these children when they grow up as Manchurian candidates? I mean, what do you think? I know you probably don't have enough inside information to really come to any definite conclusion, but what's your feeling on this? What are they doing?
It's all about power, all about people wanting power over other people. The CIA mind control program was set up to create assassins and super spies, and you certainly see that with a lot of the survivors that have written about it, like Kathy O'Brien. But the reason for the satanic ritual abuse is to have power over other people and to invoke the devil and whatever. They in the satanic worship, they worship two entities. They worship God, supposedly, and they worship Satan. And they feel like by worshiping both entities, they have more power and glory over other people. These perpetrators are very, very adept at hiding themselves. They're leaders in the community. They're doctors. They're lawyers. And I'm saying this because this is the information I get from ritual abuse survivors. These are my parent, and he was involved in this, and he's in the state legislature, or he's here, there, and everywhere. But they do this. They try to go very high. This is why the LDS report was so interesting. Is because they found people in the higher echelons of the church, but they excommunicated all the ones they found. But there are still others who are still in positions that they haven't found, and this is why this information is so important to get out. But the whole purpose is to have control over other people. And I don't, obviously you mentioned the Masons. The only information I have about the Masons is I talked to a therapist who was very prominent in a particular case here in Lehigh many years during the 1980s. It was called the Hadfield case. And in that case, he was convicted of sexual abuse of children, but there was a whole neighborhood of abuse for satanic cult that was involved in some of the testimonies of the children of that. And so those children talked about abused in what appears to be, well, I have to say this very carefully. What these perpetrators do is that they dress up in makeup and whatever to appear to be certain people. And you have a child there who is being abused, and they think that they're being abused by a certain person who's very prominent in their community, but it's the perpetrator who dresses up and looks like that person. And then in this particular case, they were doing it in a room that looked like the inside of the Salt Lake Temple. But we know that down the street...
Uh-oh, what did I do? I lost the call here. Just a second here. We're going to try to bring that back.
With us,
Okay.
loses his internet connection because of the boys up in the Fusion Center.
Yeah, they don't like me. They don't like me repeating. I'm back.
Okay.
Go ahead.
They described a room that looked like the inside of the Salt Lake Temple, but we believe that that room was actually the bottom of the Masonic Lodge down the street on South Temple, because other children have talked about going in there, and they have a room down there that appears to be like the inside of the Salt Lake Temple. So what I'm saying is that there appears to be a lot of things going on to make these little children believe that they're being abused by certain people and in certain places, that is all just a big show so that they can cover up their crimes. Then the other information I have about that is that at one time I had a man who was very, very interested in being my literary agent, and his name was Sherwood Broom. And he called me and asked for a copy of the manuscript, and I sent it off to him. And a couple of days after I sent it off to him, there was a newspaper article came out about a friend of his, and he talked about Sherwood Broom and what a great person he was, and he said that he was a master mason. And I just about fell apart because I had just sent my script off to him. Well, Sherwood called me about a week or so later, and he said he was very interested in representing my book, and I said, well, that surprises me because I heard that you're a master mason. And he says, well, I'll tell you. He says, I was a master mason. He says, when I went through the Royal Arch, I retired from it. And he said, I will not tell you anything more about it than that. But he said, Judy, you absolutely have to get this book published. Now, what I understand about the Masonic order is that a lot of the people in there are very good people, and they join it for very good reasons, and they're good brothers and all this. But when you get into the upper echelons and go through the Royal Arch, what Sherwood Broom told me, he says, when you go through the Royal Arch, which is what you do when you become a Master Mason, he says the ceremonies turn from white to black. And he says, that's all I'm going to tell you about it. And he says, you've got to get this book published.
33rd
So
degree. 33rd degree is below the 33rd degree. 32nd on down. They're pretty much just ordinary people. They've just been led into this, into the secrecy thing, and aren't really aware of the Illuminati agenda. But I mean, come on, even I've got a book right here in my hands called Morals and Dogma, written predicting 3 world wars by Confederate General Albert Pike. And he talks about their god being Lucifer. The eye on the top of that pyramid and on your dollar bill is Lucifer. And actually, I think they've actually demonized Lucifer and use that to disguise who the devil really is, or who Satan is, or that's even the occult, is it can be used. It's not much a witch working casting a spell or using the DNA from a lock of hair to, if they use it for positive purposes, they're basically using the same kind of power that Jesus used, the direct contact with God, I believe. And it's only when you make the decision to become evil, to start hurting other people, to start taking over other people, that the Satanists are using that power that's available to us all. Jesus said, you can do what I do and more. And I'd like to know a little bit more about Jenny's angel. She had some type of protection. She was supposed to do this book with you, and you were probably put together through that type of connection.
Actually, I've had a lot of very spiritual experiences while writing this book and being involved with ritual abuse survivors, and I have been told myself that this is my life's mission, and it's been a very uplifting experience for me from day one. Even though you're dealing with all this rape, torture, and murder of children, you know that Heavenly Father is there and guiding us in the right direction. And Jenny had a lot of very spiritual experiences throughout her life. When she was a young child, she was so concerned about what was happening to her. There's a free chapter, like I say, in 22faces.com that you can read the 20 faces. And in that chapter, it's about her as a young child, 5-year-old child, and how she jumps from 1 minute to the next, from 1 hour to the next, or 1 day to the next, and doesn't understand what happens in between. Well, it's because her altered personalities are taking over. But she was very confused as to what was happening to her, because all she knew was that she just missed time, and she was suddenly in one place where she was in another place a minute ago. And so she prayed about it, and during the prayer, her Heavenly Father told her to write down her experiences. Now, this is very interesting because a lot of the treatment of multiplicity has to do with being able to write out, your experiences, because when you do, these altered personalities take over and they write out, what's happened to them. It's a very healing experience. And so she started doing diaries when she was about 7 or 8 years old. She started these diaries. And as she wrote in her diary, she'd, just write a simple little entry by herself, and then right after that entry, you'll find an entry by one of her altered personalities, mainly JJ, because JJ was always, very active. And in this middle of 22 Faces is a copy of some of her altered writings, which are interesting because the altered will actually sign their names to the writings. But she used prayer throughout her life to get her through, one instance to another, very reliant on Heavenly Father, and that was what carried her through all this very confusing life, was her belief in God. And down when she was so little, she was also told the reason she was writing her experiences was because there would be a book published about it someday. And I had a very spiritual experience, which is really too close to me to relate, but I was told to write her experiences, and I was told to write this book. And my whole life has been dedicated to this ever since, because it's such a comforting feeling to know that there's a higher power up there that has power over everybody. When these Satanists confront you, and they've done a lot of that with me through the years, I know that there's a protector up there that's taking care of it, because he has promised me he would do that. That if I would do this work, that he would protect me and my family, and he certainly has done that through the years. And this is the same reason why Jenny is so brave to tell her story. I mean, she was threatened with death for her and her family. She exposed this, and yet she was able to do it. And you see this with a lot of survivors, is that they want to tell their stories, but they are so frightened because, these people have access to them, they have access to their family, they have access to their kids, and terrible things happen to them if they expose what they're doing. But there are more and more survivors all the time. I was just so pleased with this petition that so many survivors would go in and comment and say, I'm a survivor, and this is happening to me. This is a great healing thing for them and for us as a country, is that we need to realize and get out of this denial that this is going on.
I have a theory that God's alive and well in the 21st century. He just uses the internet because burning bushes are a little passe.
That's true. I know he's there. He's there all the time.
And, what we're talking about here, I don't think he looks anything like Charlton Heston. He is the force that holds the atoms together, that forms our DNA. It just happens to be an intelligent force. We just don't recognize it like that.
That's right. And
I mean, I don't even know how I got a hold of you to bring your story here to get it up on. It'll be put up on YouTube. It'll be put up on Wolf Spirit. It'll be put up on. It's being put up on Crusade. It'll be archived on freeamerican.com with all the links to your site.
Oh, thank you. You know, I don't know how we got together either, but I sure believe it was a blessing, and it was guided in that direction. I have been so blessed throughout this whole process. Like I say, I've been doing this over 20 years now, and even while I was writing the book, certain information would actually come to my doorstep. I would have survivors come right to my front door and say, you know, I'm giving you this because I've been told to give you this information. And it was research and other things that had happened on that just fit into exactly. I would go to church and hear something in the lesson that fit right into that particular chapter that I was writing right there. It's just been an amazing experience to me. There have been so many people that have come into my life that have helped me. Like this David Schroeder that you talked to. I believe you just had an interview with him recently, didn't you?
Last Friday, David Schroeder.
Yeah, he's been a great blessing to me. He's really helped me, and he's a survivor and been through hell himself, and yet he's able to reach out to other people. And this Neil Brick is a fantastic person. I mean, he's a survivor himself, and he has this huge organization of mind control survivors. And he runs that so efficiently and is such a fantastic researcher. I mean, if you ever want to get into any research on mind control or ritual abuse, you go to the SMART site, S-M-A-R-T, or Ritual Abuse RS site. It's just amazing what he's been able to put together. And Neil has been a really good friend. Felicity Lee runs Ivory Garden. And Felicity Lee is a fantastic person. I mean, she is a survivor herself, but she is just so intelligent and so helpful and been such a great, uplifting person to literally thousands of ritual abuse and mind control survivors and dissociative identity disorder sufferers. Fantastic person. Then there's Kevin Annette. And he's a whole other story in and of itself. I mean, he's literally taking down the Catholic Pope for things that they have done, and these 50,000 missing children. You know, he has a book out called Hidden No Longer, like I mentioned earlier, and you can find that on the Child Abuse Recovery website. But he spent 20 or so years researching these 50,000 missing children, Native children, up in Canada, and what happened to them with the Catholic Church and with the government of Canada. And through that, he was held a common law court on the Pope. And a couple of days after they served the arrest warrant on Pope Ratzinger, he resigned, you know, from his position there. And Kevin Annette is a fantastic person. He's just so humble and so helpful, and he's organized survivors in 21 different countries to speak out about what's going on in the abuse situation there with the Catholic Church. And all these people have come into my life and made it so much more meaningful. And you too, Clayton, you know, being able to be on your program is such an honor. And your help in helping these, what we're really about is helping these abused from. They're out there and they are being abused, and we've got to get the word out. People have got to get out of denial that this is going on. That's what's helping to keep it going, is that people won't believe that it's going on.
That's right. It's and you know, that's the problem that we have when we're broadcasting here, when I'm broadcasting here, when I put what I put in my magazine. I've been doing this for 40 years. I've never been sued for libel or slander. I've been libeled and slandered a lot, but it's you know, it's the problem is if you realize, if you come to the realization that what I'm saying, what we're talking about here is real, is true, then it becomes your problem. And people want to, they prefer denial. They prefer ignorance is bliss. Because if you realize that what we're saying is true, then you got to do something. I mean, that's what I did. And as far as I'm concerned, Waco, what happened at Waco to the Branch Davidians, they killed 17 little children to save them from a child molester. I'm not buying that. This was a ritual sacrifice on a massive scale. This was satanic in nature. And I saw that happen sitting in my canal front home, waterfront home in Miami, with all of my toys, all of my boats, all of my vehicles and my motorcycle. And I said to my wife, I will never sit back and watch something like this happen again without trying to do something. So I started this magazine, I started this radio show, and I started the militias. Helped start them around the country with the Free American. And everything I've done, everything I did was right on. I mean, the militias never were a terrorist organization. I started the militias in New Mexico in the governor's office, and that governor just ran for president. I've been involved in 2 presidential campaigns to try to make a difference there, but you can't make a difference there if the media doesn't tell you who's running for office, who's if they want to eliminate the Federal Reserve, if they want to eliminate the slavery of Americans to the banker system, then you don't hear about them on television. So the press is as much of an enemy as the Satanists out there. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe we're talking about the same thing. But folks, if you don't listen and learn about this, you won't recognize it if it's happening. If you're aware that this happens, then maybe you can do something about it. And you know, I've had people tell me that with pretty good accuracy that they're not as powerful as they want you to believe they are. If they were, we'd still be under the Syrian Empire, we'd still be under the Roman Empire, we'd still be under the British Empire, the empire on which the sun never sets. So we can do something. And by the way, in my latest issue of the Free American magazine, which you can get, by the way, for $2.99 at shop.freeamerican, I've got the story of Iceland. The people of Iceland organized, protested, kicked the bankers out, kicked the government out, and started all over again with no debt. That's in the latest issue of the Free American. So we can make a difference. People are making a difference. And Judy, you're making a difference. By bringing this information forward, you've helped heal a woman, and you're bringing hope to other people that have been abused. A 6-year-old child can't do much to stop this kind of ritual abuse, but you can be healed. And, you know, we can do something. As adults, as Christians, we can do something. And when I say Christians, you know, I'm talking about the people that truly follow the words of Jesus. And Jesus told you, you can do what I do and more. And the Catholic Church, I just got in a discussion on this with one of my supporters on Wolf Spirit. Wanted to know, I mentioned the fact that I sold peace symbols in the 60s. I sold them to Kmart, I sold them to Spencer's Gifts, I sold them to every head shop in the country. And how could you do that? That was a broken cross. The cross. You want to worship a cross? You want to worship a defeated Jesus hanging on an instrument of torture, and that's what the Catholic Church wants you to believe in. The Bible says you're not supposed to worship graven images. So here you've got people, or as Jesus talked about it, he said to beware the Jews who say they're Jews but are not, or of the synagogue of Satan. And I believe you could say that about the Judeo-Christians out there that are ignoring this kind of trafficking, this kind of abuse here. You know, if you're going to be, you're either part of the answer or you're part of the problem. What do you think?
That's true. I think the answer is educate, educate, educate. And if you go into the childabuserecovery.com website, there's a lot of information about how to recognize a ritually abused child, how, and there's a whole history of the CIA mind control program that's about 17 pages long, about how that all came about. And there's videos available on the internet. It has links in there to some of these 1995 hearings, which are really interesting to watch. And you come out of there just thinking, hey, they knew about this back in 1995, and yet Congress voted not to release the information, both in 1977 with the Pike Committee, by the way. The interesting name, the guy that was head of that committee, they voted not to release the information. And then 1995, they voted again. You have survivors in there pleading with Congress not to investigate this and do further investigation, and yet they not only didn't do any more further investigation, they voted not to release the information to the public. And it's absolutely disgusting. But if you educate yourself, I mean, and one of the ways you can is to look around you at these little children. There are so many that are being abused right now, and how you can tell a ritually abused child is by two different characteristics. One is they dissociate, and that's why reading 22 Faces will help you. Is if you understand what a dissociated child is, you know a dissociated child is going through trauma of some kind. And if you find a child who's dissociated, you know that that child is going through abuse right now, and you need to do something about it. But a dissociated child will have a loss of time. They won't remember. It's not just forgetting stuff, it's forgetting whole hours or whole days of stuff. And it's because their mind is, you know, they have these alter personalities that just take over and protect them so that they can, you know, get through life. So that's one way you can tell that there's an abused child. Another way is voices in their heads. And voices in their heads is actually voices talking to each other. Now, Jenny, I remember when she first told me about this, she says, I thought everybody had voices in their head. You know, that was just normal as a child. But what it is these alters are talking to each other. It's different than a psychotic or a schizophrenic, where that's a chemical imbalance and they see people outside of themselves because of their chemical imbalance. With a dissociated child, it's their actual alter personalities talking to each other. So those are the two characteristics that if you recognize that a child is you know, having those symptoms, then that's a child that's being abused, and you need to step in and do something about it. Call protective services, call the police, educate protective services, educate the police on this ritual abuse stuff that's going on. Our whole society needs to be educated, because this denial is so huge. I mean, it was amazing to me when 22 Faces came out. You know, we had this great story, and yet people didn't want to believe that it was going on, and media didn't pick up on stuff because they didn't want to be the ones to say, hey, this is going on. This is too weird of a story to, you know, take it all. This denial has a lot to do with this being continually perpetrated.
Let me share what some people have said about 22 Faces. 22 Faces is excellently written, exposing evil of which few are completely aware, and that has existed since Earth began. Jenny Hill, who escaped death, shows that once in a while the dark side can be tolerated, hopefully repaired. Her biography suggests we should be focused on helping those suspected to be in an abusive situation. Mrs. Byington is to be congratulated for her efforts to make these intolerable and inexcusable evil practices public, especially in uncovering that this could happen to friends, relatives, and even ourselves. That was Alice Yeats, retired Air Force worldwide logistician. Lucille Flint of Utah says 22 Faces is exceptionally well written, and I've traveled to numerous other countries and in every state in the USA, plus every province in Canada, associating with people from all walks of life. I've met numerous, really too many people who have been exposed to or experienced satanic abuse, multiple personalities, none of which are members of the LDS faith. I know it happens in most religions in every country and seems to be leaving more and more victims. All are still struggling to maintain or live a normal life, which for them will never be. Jenny Hill's story is heartbreaking, alarming, and Byington's writing helps give a perspective for the reader on how to recognize children who are currently being ritually abused. Thank you, Judy and Jenny, for this book, which should be read by all parents, leaders, and teachers. And folks, the links to that, they can order the book from your site, can't they? 22faces.com.
It's 22faces.22faces.com, and there's different links in there that you can order it from Barnes & Noble or Amazon or from the site. You can get an autographed copy by ordering it directly from the site, but there's different ways that you can order it in there. It's out in ebook also, and it's out in audiobook also if you want to order it from Kate Thompson directly. But that was an interesting comment by Lucille Flint, and that's one thing I wanted to emphasize, is that even though this was found within the LDS Church, that is the one large organization that's attempted to try to do something about it. But it's found in all religions. It's found in all societies. It's everywhere. It's just that, you know, the LDS Church happened to pinpoint, you know, what was going on here, and I hope other organizations start to do the same. It's something that we really need to wake up to, because it's literally contributing to the downfall of our society when you understand how evasive and pervasive this is.
You know, this country was formed by people opposing the New World Order of their day 200 years ago. And this, I did a film called No Such Thing as the New World Order, because as far as I'm concerned, the money changers Jesus ran out of the temple are still with us. They just changed the name of the temple. They call it the Federal Reserve Bank of England or the International Monetary Fund. And what we're talking about, this America is one of the last bastions of freedom. And what I do with the Free American, and what I do with this show here every day, is tell you who is threatening you, how they're doing this. They want to disarm you. They want to put you under their control. And the letters that you've got here in this book come from all over the world. This Shannon says, I am a survivor of child torture and trauma in Australia. Was brought to Australia at the age of 2 by my father and spent the next 10 years being groomed to lead my generation into Satanism in Australia. I have a number of personalities, and I'm wondering who you managed to get them, how you managed to get them to cooperate with you. It's and here, by the way, here this is important because it brings back what I said about Mengele, the sheriffs or the bushes, whatever you want to call them. Joe says in the 60s and 70s, the Navy had Joseph Mengele working at China Lake He was called Dr. Green. I was part of the program. Used children of Navy employees. My programmer was Hans Brunner, ex-Nazi from Germany, working with Mengele. They called this guy Dr. Brown, his code name. Some of us were used in a super soldier or marine program. Some had psi abilities and more. Used us in Vietnam as marine and other programs. Those who were not psychopathic were turned into sex slaves. I did that for a long time. Illuminati ran the entire thing. San Diego, a Navy town, is headquarters of Illuminati on the West Coast. Pittsburgh is headquartered on the East Coast. I survived only because Brunner died of cancer. All my memories are moved to a subconscious mind. Memories are stored in subconscious. Conscious mind will never be given evil or sick memories. It's a filter system. A person who's been a victim can go through hypnosis or psychic work to dig out the truth if one wants to have it. Good luck. That from Joe.
Oh, that's wonderful. You know, these survivors are the ones that are going to expose this. You know, when they start telling their stories, and you can find them all over the internet, there's all kinds of books and information from survivors on the internet, but they're the ones that are really going to expose this when they come out and tell what's happened to them personally. They're very brave people, very intelligent people.
I've just put up on the chat room here that you have a petition, and you say, I invite you to comment on and sign our petition asking for a congressional investigation of the CIA mind control of children. Members of Congress are being contacted and will read comments you make in this petition. That's www.change.org/petitions/US Congress survivors request investigation CIA mind control of children. That's linked on the site. That's in the first chapter of the book, and that's linked
that
under.
Link can also, that link can also be found on childabuserecovery.com.
Yes, we put that up on the chat room also, and that will be all that is connected on the Free American. That will remain up for the next few months.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, we've gone to several senators and shown them petition and given them the information, and they're taking a real strong look at this and seeing how many people sign this petition and see how interested people are in actually doing something about this. So this petition is extremely important, that we get a lot of signers and people sending it out to their email list and asking them to sign it. The first signers on this petition were survivors, and that's why we've got all these comments. But now we need to get it out to the general public and get them to sign it.
Well, we are doing that, and I would ask you and suggest this is, we've still got 30 more minutes, and this has been a really excellent show, Judy. This is, I'm very pleased with the interview. I'm pleased with your work. I'm pleased with the book. I've got my signed copy, folks. I suggest you go out and get yours also. and you know, you can copy when you right click on your name, you get the URL from this. You can also add the URL for Wolf Spirit and get the all this is archived, and send this out to anybody on your list. And folks, this is the mainstream media is not your friend. Although you have been on some of the mainstream media. You've talked about this, and but generally the mainstream media wants you to believe that a bunch of Arabs in a cave in Afghanistan, you know, made the World Trade Centers fall down. They want you to believe that the BATF was just trying to rescue those 17 little children they murdered. And they also murdered the 22 little children in the Murrah building, the FBI headquarters there, or the Murrah building there, where the BATF didn't show up for work that day. You know, these are not nice people. They're evil people, and you have to stand up against them. You have to stand up against them. You know, they've tried to kill me. They've tried to stop me. I won't be stopped, and I won't be silenced. And I will continue bringing you these shows as long as I've got your support. You can support me by picking up the Free Americans. And if I have your permission, Judy, in the first edition of the Free American out of January 1st, 2014, I will put a article in there from about your book, and I'll put an ad for your book in the Free American magazine. Now,
Thank you so much.
I sold the Free American worldwide in the Barnes & Noble, Books a Million, and you paid $5 for it 10 years ago. Today, you can get it for $2.99. I cut out all the middlemen. I'm not paying Hearst for the paper. I'm not paying the printer for the ink. And and I'm not paying the Postal Service and UPS to deliver tons of magazines all over the country. I'm doing it all on the internet. We've got the internet. God gave us the internet. God works on the internet. And that's how we're getting this information out to you right now. This is how you're getting the show. You don't have to have a 6-foot satellite dish to get this radio show anymore. We have made progress. Remember that every weapon that we have is a double-edged sword, cuts both ways, and we've got to put it to our advantage. And we can do that if you share this with people. If you can, if you tell people about this show, if you tell people about this book, if you tell people about this magazine, you are doing something. You've no longer become a useful idiot. You can step out of that. You can step out of that. And you can do something productive. There are people that don't know this is happening. They don't call, this is what I try to tell people every day, Judy. They don't call television programming for nothing. And the 10th plank on the Communist Manifesto is education. They want to get a hold of your education. They want to be able to program you and your children and indoctrinate you and your children rather than educate. I want to educate you. And by the way, Judy, if you go to my website, you'll see 2 links there. One for the Little Red Schoolhouse and one for Timothy Bible College. That's put on by, that's run by Dr. Jake Wade. I helped him start it 20 years ago. I'm on the board of directors for Timothy Bible College. You don't have to go to the hallowed halls of a university to get an education. You can get it right on the internet, and you don't have to put your kids in Columbine, Sandy Hook, or daycare centers in federal buildings. You don't have to do that. You got a choice here. Make the right choice.
That's one of the wonderful things that I think Heavenly Father gave us is the internet, because it's just you have to kind of sift through some of those falsehoods that are on there, but boy, you can self-educate yourself just by Googling. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience.
That's right. That's right. Now, what can we do? There is more happening, and this is one of the, I think, the pluses behind what I do in the Free American. I'm telling people about, you specialize, and you've worked on this, and the book is a wonderful example of what you do when you really concentrate. But this is a multifaceted, matter of fact, I just put up the National Reconnaissance Office put a satellite out to help track all of your phone calls and your internet use, and they've got that on. They got the symbol of an octopus talking about with its tentacles reaching around the world. It's you know, so it's really an ongoing thing, and they have their tentacles in so many areas: film, movies, television, radio, your newspapers, and we've got to oppose that. This is indoctrination. This is programming, and we've got to stand up to that. We've got to educate ourselves. That's why you can get your degree. I'm working on my master's degree at Timothy Bible College now. We can do this. We can change things. They don't have the power that they think they want you to believe they have, because they just want you to submit. They just want you to be a good slave. Don't rebel against your masters. Whoops, I'm sorry. That came from the Bible, didn't it? So you've got to be discerning in everything here. Somebody might have slipped that in to counteract Jesus' stand against slavery, or the church's stance. I mean, let me talk about that. Let's talk about that, because this lawsuit in Canada, this thing that in Canada, the Queen of England and the Catholic Church were found guilty, as this by a common law jury, to be guilty of, and think about this, folks. You know, before this country was ever settled, the Catholic Church sent people over and basically committed genocide against the Indian populations, the Native Americans. And my God, they had a civilization in South America that we couldn't build today. We couldn't build today. We couldn't build a pyramid today. Somebody built it thousands of years ago.
Can I break in for a moment?
Absolutely, sir.
The stupid individual who's calling with an unknown phone number, I do not and will not answer unknown phone numbers. If you haven't got the courage and the honesty to use your right telephone number, you can do without calling into this show or any other show on Wolf Spirit Radio.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. I don't. I think these people are cowards. This is what happens on the internet. People hide behind the internet too. It's not as you can use it to hide behind. I've got my phone number. I've got my websites. I've got Judy's books, everything up on freeamerican.com. You can, I don't hide from nobody. And the tactic, there is two tactics that are used, probably as old as mankind: divide and conquer, and they want you to be afraid. Mike?
They do. That's how they have power over people, is to make them afraid.
Be afraid. Be very, very afraid. The New World Order. The Germans are. The Russians are coming. The Russians were never our enemies, folks. That was all propaganda.
It's really interesting when you talk to ritual abuse survivors. They really make a choice when they're kind of in their preteen years of whether or not they're going to stay in the satanic coven that they have, seen all these murders and participated in that as a child, or whether or not they're going to be a survivor. And let me tell you about a couple experiences.
Okay.
I had one of one of these ladies I worked with at the very beginning that were trying to get information on it was actually her uncle. She told me an experience where, as a young child, she was very rebellious, even though he was raping her and taking her to all these murders and everything. She really rebelled, and they were at one particular murder of a little boy, and she just started screaming. Now, in the satanic ceremony, you have to be absolutely quiet. There is no noise whatsoever except for the chanting and the other things they do. But she screamed, and so her father took her out and made her sit in the weeds outside. While she was sitting out there in the weeds, she was praying. She was only like 4 or 5 years old at the time. And as she prayed, she said there was a man in a white suit who came up to her and put his arms around her and told her not to be afraid, that she would grow up and she would be a mother in Zion. She said that experience carried her through her childhood. And when she was about a preteen, she started to tell a couple of things that her father had done, not the real murder and rape stuff, but she started to talk about to other people, you know, how bad her father was. As soon as she started doing that, he quit abusing her. He quit taking her to satanic ceremonies. Her cousin, on the other hand, was in the occult till she was about 17. And she went to what appeared to be another murder ceremony that was 20 or so miles from her home. And she, at that point, decided she didn't want to be a part of that anymore. And she left that ceremony and walked all the way home at night. Once she did that, her father quit taking her to these ceremonies. What I'm saying is, when these survivors stick up to their perpetrators, when they say, this is no longer going to be part of my life, they run. The perpetrators run. They don't want to be involved in this, and they don't want to have anything more to do with it. So they will then stay away from them. And that's what I found when perpetrators have tried to confront me and scare me. I just confront them with what they're doing, and they turn around and go in the other direction. They're not very brave people when it comes right down to it. They don't want to be found out.
All right, Judy, we have a caller here. We'll take the call from the 863 area code. Who do we have? Yep, they hung up. Okay.
Oh. Okay.
I rarely take calls because I prefer to I feature my guest. I feature my guest here. So, but whoops, what's that? Oh, that's Crusade. We lost Crusade for a second. See if we can get that back here. Got it back. All right. And we're still recording here and there, and we're doing well. So let's go back to this. When this woman or this victim prayed, somebody in white showed up in the room with her.
Well, she was outside sitting in the weeds, a little 4-year-old girl, and this man appeared, and he was in a white suit, and he just put her arms around her and comforted her and told her that she would be a mother in Zion and that she would grow up and that she would, you know, be able to get away from these types of experiences. And that faith that there was an angel there, a higher power, carried her through her life, which is the same thing that happened to Jenny, when this this spiritual experience where this angel appeared and saved her from this satanic sacrifice, that experience carried her throughout her life, that there was someone up there looking over her and you know, helping her through life and all these terrible experiences. Because these survivors don't just experience this when they're little. You know, these perpetrators access them, you know, throughout life and threaten them and tell them, you know, if you expose this story, we're going to kill your kids or whatever, you know. And being able to stand up to them makes a big difference. I've heard a lot of spiritual stories from survivors, how angels have appeared during their abuse and helped them, you know, through the whole thing. And I think disassociation itself is a gift of God. You know, it's the ability of the mind to handle all this terrible, terrible abuse. If you can imagine being a small little child and having no control over someone being killed in front of you, or somebody being tortured, or you being tortured, and you know it's going to happen again, and even though they, you know, repress these memories, they still know that it's going to happen again, and probably in the next day or the next week, and they can't talk about it because, well, Jenny was told, you know, that they would kill her family members if she told them anything that they were doing to her. And so that she felt like she was saving her family by going through this, because they're very convincing. You know, you have these perpetrators that sexually abuse a little child and then say, you know, you're gonna kill their family, one of her little sisters, if she tells, you know, what they did to her. It's a very heavy burden to carry, but these angels and prayer has kept Jenny sane her whole life, because she knows that there's a higher power up there watching over her. You know, he can't control the decisions of man. You know, he allows us to have our own decisions, unfortunately. But what he can do is give us a lot of comfort and make us better person by listening to his word and being good people that he wants us to be.
Well,
part of the satanic worship is getting these victims not to believe in God, not to believe in Jesus Christ, not to believe, you know, in a higher power, because that gives them a lot more power over the victim. You know, if they can get them to believe that. And a lot of these survivors have a rough time with organized religion for that very reason, is because they've been programmed not, you know, to rely on someone other than themselves to get them through life.
Well, you know, God is out there. I put it a little differently than most of your religious folks, you know. I say, if you're omniscient and omnipotent and you're the only one of your kind in the universe, what are you? The answer is generally from people I know, oh, God. Well, you're God. Of course, you're God. Well, what else are you? I think you're bored to tears. So what do? You create us with a little bit of your divinity that we call the soul, that we call the conscience, that we call ESP, and then you sit back behind my eyes, behind your eyes, and say, well, I wonder how Judy and Clay are going to hit it off. I wonder how they're going to do. I wonder what Clay's going to do next. And, you know, my goal is not to disappoint him. Everybody, people say, well, don't you fear God? I said, why would I fear my Father? Why would I care? Why would I, you know, I don't do, if I'm not doing anything wrong, I don't have anything to fear from God. If you're evil out there and you're abusing children, you better believe that God will send an angel. He may look like me at the time, and you might find yourself flying out the second floor window. But, you know, one of the problems we've got, Judy, is how do you fight evil without becoming evil? And to me, that's the lesson Jesus taught us. That's one of the things he was sent here for, to teach us how to do that. And, you know, that's really the basis for all the church, whether it's the LDS or...
Was good, like he's...
I'm sorry, go ahead, repeat. Did I lose you there for a second?
Oh, are you there?
Yes,
okay.
ma'am, go ahead, go ahead.
I just wanted to tell you about my personal beliefs. I believe that before we came to this earth, we were all together in heaven with Heavenly Father and Jesus, and that Heavenly Father told us that we were going to come to this earth to be tested. And how we passed that test would define how close we could be to Him when we return back to Him. But also Satan was there, and he said he didn't believe that people should be tested.
I believe you're right, and I believe
that
I
they
was.
should be able to just do whatever they wanted to do, and have whatever they want to have, and through. And so I believe that Heavenly Father told that there were some spirits that decided to go along with Satan's philosophy, that they didn't want to go through the test. So Heavenly Father said, well, if you don't want to go through the test, then you can't have a body. So I will not allow you to have bodies. So those are the ones that try to take over our bodies because they so want to have a body. Those are the evil spirits. That's what I personally believe.
That's interesting.
Because they chose not to take on the responsibility of going through the test.
That's a really interesting. I think you've got it. You've got it there. You know, we're put in this body. We're given free will. I believe I was sent here. I believe I was sent here. When they blew up that first atomic bomb on White Sands Missile Range, and I ended up living 10 miles from there. 10 miles. My neighbors slept through it when they set off the first atomic blast. Their houses were made out of adobe, and they're still alive to this day. But
Wow.
I believe I was sitting there, and there's been times I was driving along Turtle Creek Boulevard in Dallas, Texas, very ritzy neighborhood, 4 lanes, separated by Turtle Creek, and I came up to Fitzgerald Street, and I had a green light. You couldn't see the street, you couldn't see the cars, mansions, and the walls were so high, you couldn't see the street, but they had a light. And my cousin was visiting me, and I locked up the brakes and went sliding into an intersection with a green light. And a car ran the red light and totaled a Volkswagen on the other side of coming the opposite direction. My cousin just kind of looked at me and said, "How did you know?" I don't know. It just felt like I was supposed to stop. To me, that's God at work. And
Certainly something.
you know, I've died 2 or 3 times, and I jokingly say I think I got kicked out of heaven. They kept telling me that I still had work to do, get back in that body. That's actually a true story. Went down the tunnel, saw the light, and turned around and came back.
Wow. Well,
So,
you're certainly here for a purpose. You're doing great work.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work that you are doing. What can you can go to the freeamerican.com. Go to her site, click on her name, you can hear the show, pass it on. Send it out to everybody on your email list. I mean, this, most of you listening here, you're not mistreating your kids, you're not trying to put your kids, but the influence is still out there. If people, as long as a child anywhere is being abused, we need to stand up for them. Matter of fact, there's a whole bike club, and I'm an old biker. There's a whole bike club that I'll find somebody to come on and do a show about that is opposing any kind of abuse of children. Matter of fact, I think I got them in, I got their story. I do have their story in the last Free American, December 1st issue of the Free American. Get that and read that. People, and there's an awful lot of kids out there that know that Santa Claus wears leathers and rides a two-wheel sleigh. Every Christmas there's a toy run that the bikers put on, and we feed a lot of children, and we see that they got a teddy bear under the tree. And folks, there was a million bikers that went to Washington, D.C. That sent a real strong message to your congressman. Now that's the other problem we got. We've got congressmen there that are supporting the New World Order, the one world government, the government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers. But again, we've got Iceland that stood up to them, kicked the bankers out. And we can do that here. That's the subject of this issue, December 15th issue of the Free American Magazine. And that's available now. It's not December 15th yet, but it's up on my website. We can kick the bankers out, and we can take these. You know, you're a member of a church. If you're in the LDS, or you're even in the Catholic Church, or the Baptist Church, or the Methodist Church, stand up, read your Bible, read what Jesus tried to tell you. Remember that Jesus ran the money changers out of the temple. They just changed the name of the temple. We can do this, folks. We can do this.
I gotta tell you.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna tell you a little about Jenny. You were talking about Christmas and the bikers. Jenny, when she was, you know, after she got out of the state hospital, she got to a point where she couldn't function very well, and she was living on just her Social Security disability. And she had neighbors around her who were very, very poor and weren't invited to Christmas by their families or anything. They were very low at Christmas. So for months, she would save up her money and buy a little roast. And then at Christmas time, she would invite them over for dinner. And she was doing that, and when I met her and we started doing the book, I told my neighbors about it, and we started collecting gifts and Christmas dinner. And that's been a tradition now for about 15 years or so. We collect dinner and Christmas gifts for the mentally challenged and the poor, and then it's called Jenny's Party, and we go down there on Christmas Eve and serve these people. And this is something that Jenny started just because she wanted to, you know, just because she wanted to reach out and help other people. And in the very poorest, I mean, it took her like 3 months to save enough money to buy a little roast, for Pete's sakes, you know, and yet she was able to do that and help other people. And it's because she went through all this, and it made her humble. And I think once you're humble, you can really look out and see the other people around you who are hurting also, and be more sympathetic to those people than the high, rich, and I don't see a lot of high, rich, and mighty people going down, you know, doing what Jenny does at Christmas time. They're too busy with other things, but sometimes your trials can make you a better person, and often your trials make you a better person.
All right, we're out of time. Judy, thank you. I'd like to have you back on next year.
Thank you. I would love to come back. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right. God bless you.
As petition goes on, I'd like to be able to, you know, talk about that as we get more help on this petition.
All right, dear. Call me anytime. You've got my numbers now. God bless you all. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.